Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
The contemporary art world is vibrant and booming as never before. It's a 21st century phenomenon, a global industry in its own right. Brilliant Ideas looks at the artists at the heart of this. Artists with the unique power to astonish, challenge and inspire. In this programme, British sculptor Conrad Shawcross.
That tripod's off the ground and this one's off the ground. We've got to bring it up.
British artist Conrad Shawcross has never been afraid to think big. As proven by his latest astounding project, Dappled Light of the Sun at Britain's Royal Academy. In the past decade, he's had the most meteoric career in British contemporary art. And he's now the youngest member of the Royal Academy.
The good thing about an artist is you can just mix things up and just kind of use a bit of sort of alchemy, put a bit of philosophy in with a bit of maths, with a bit of art.
Embracing ideas from geometry to philosophy, physics and metaphysics, he creates works that are filled with paradox and poetry.
You can't talk about Conrad Shawcross at the moment without framing everything in terms of youthful prodigy.
You need a bigger hammer, really.
I see Conrad as a sort of Leonardo da Vinci of our time. Leonardo was obsessed with how things were made, how things operated, the sort of mechanization of things.
I often think of him in terms of Bach, this extraordinary mathematical structure on which this wonderful sort of like poetic lyricism hangs.
What Conrad does is he ignites a torrent of ideas about things that spill over way beyond what are conventionally called the confines of art.
Conrad is fearless and he has incredible energy. But I sometimes think, you know, my goodness, this young man, he never sleeps.
Best known for his mysterious mechanical sculptures, Conrad Shawcross first came to prominence in 2004 with his brilliantly original work, The Nervous System.
I spent 4 months locked in my room building this crazy rope machine, wove a sort of helix of cord into a rope very, very slowly. It was very much a journey of me trying to understand time. Rope can represent time because it's both linear and cyclical. It's made up of all these composite strands. What I made highlights the limits of language and the limits of perception and the way we describe time, or the reliance on metaphor to describe time. I was described a bit as this sort of Heath Robinson artist at the beginning, which was not something I ever really liked, because I was never trying to sort of play around with whimsy. I found it a bit upsetting because I wanted the machine to feel very rational. But it was received incredibly well, and Saatchi bought it, which is amazing. It's the first time you sort of sell something. There's nothing like it, the sort of feeling of all that work paying off. Then all the press that followed and was fantastic, and that sort of led on to, just the beginning of this sort of journey.
Today, Conrad works out of his studio in East London.
We're going to have to swing the other tetrahedron out.
Brought up in London, the son of writers Marina Warner and William Shawcross, his childhood interests hinted at what was to come.
I was always taken to the theatre and to art galleries, and the holidays would be arranged around these kind of pilgrimages to churches and frescoes and altarpieces. And I remember going to sort of Pompeii and to these sort of ruins and loving it. But they were a bit concerned that I didn't really read as much as them, and my interests were much more in sort of building towers and structures in my room and taking things apart.
In the late 1990s, Conrad attended the Ruskin School of Art, part of Oxford University.
Studying in art in a university was key to my practice, in that we were sort of exposed to all these subjects and history and English and poetry and sciences. So it wasn't art about art. became very obsessed with how my car worked. I think my teachers at the Ruskin were pretty confused. I was sort of out in the yard, just basically sort of being a mechanic, and I think at the time they were like, you can't repair your car as part of your course.
Here at the Science Museum in London, the rich array of objects and ideas had a profound influence on Conrad.
I would go to the Science Museum a lot when I was a kid. My main memories of it were when I was a student at the Ruskin, and I would go there for inspiration, particularly the maths gallery. It was this very 1960s room of displays, and there was a lot of very beautiful sort of Victorian models.
Many of his works pay tribute to pioneering figures from the past. One of these is Charles Babbage, the 19th century polymath who many regard as the pioneer of computing, even though his own machine, the difference engine, was never completed.
One of the first sort of historical reference works I made was called Paradigm Ode to the Difference Engine. So I sort of put myself in the role of a Babbage-like engineer who believed that they would, if they built this thing, somehow the world would change. But the machine had no product. It would just weave and unweave and weave and unweave, and it would just go around this infinite loop. The machine, if you did turn it on, would generally sort of slowly crush itself. So it was a static work, but it was a bit tough because everyone was like, oh, you just couldn't get it to work. And I was like, no, this really was. I was trying to be a bit more sophisticated. I was trying to not make this big, spinny, flashy thing. I wanted to create a work about an idea and about failure.
Conrad's extraordinary mechanical sculptures soon caught the attention of one of the most influential figures in British art.
His work was so unusual in that it was informed by science and mathematics, and it had a different feel from anything else that I'd known before.
Come on, faster.
The point about Conrad is these distinctions don't exist for him. Whether it's mathematics or whether it's craft, whether it's art, whether it's science, whether it's engineering or design, he's working from the position that this is a unified discourse.
Science and art were originally married to each other, but there's been a period of separation, but I think there's a momentum to get them back together again. There is this sense that the artist is irrational and the scientist is rational, and that therefore they can't coexist, but I don't think it is like that. I think there's so much irrational or imaginative leaps of faith that the scientist has to make. And so many artists, whether it's Monet or whether it's Carl Andre, they set themselves experiments, they go back to the same lily pads, they're painted at different times of day, but it's the same scene, and they get beyond the real, beyond the visible, and trying to discover.
Like all great artists, it's interesting to know what's behind, you know, the ideas that somebody's exploring. But I think what he's also able to do is make very beautiful objects so that one can just appreciate the sort of formal and aesthetic qualities. And it's that sort of layering where the more you dig, the more you find out, and the kind of more eloquent the work becomes.
Ideas. Ideas.
Conrad Shawcross is one of Britain's most exciting young artists. Exploring the potent marriage of art and science, his work has developed in diverse directions. Here at the new art centre Roche Court in Wiltshire, he's putting the finishing touches to an exhibition of recent sculptures.
He made his name for these quite extraordinary mechanical objects. And in the last couple of years, he's been changing both the style of work and the materials that he uses. And I think it's the diversity of ideas, it's the diversity of materials, the diversity of forms that has really surprised me about Conrad.
The mathematics of music in visual form has become a major theme within Conrad's work.
So this is the sort of famous Victorian harmonograph, which became a sort of Victorian novelty at dinner parties and a toy, essentially. It was actually invented to study the vibrations in buildings when they were building the tube network. So it was almost like a seismograph. But it was the birth of synesthesia and the birth of visualizing musical mathematics. You get these sort of beautiful forms that emerge from the noise. This is a machine that I made maybe 8 years ago, and it's a variation on a harmonograph. It's a bit looser, everything's a bit more kind of wonky, because I wasn't interested in just creating a pure facsimile of a chord, because I think that the interesting thing is this sort of near miss or this discordancy.
Conrad uses the harmonograph to produce a drawing based on the mathematical ratios within a musical chord. It's then transformed into 3 dimensions in his manifold sculpture.
In one way you could describe it as a picture of a chord falling into silence. And it sits on this long stem, but time is moving downwards, and then there's a decay factor, so it's a journey towards silence. They are visual, silent realizations of an oral experience. I think people will see different things in them, and I don't mind really what that is. I have to sort of surrender control a bit, but hopefully they work on lots of different levels, and it's the work that you kind of lose control of once you've made it that are the most interesting. And so that's when they sort of shimmer or oscillate between different meanings and things you didn't even think of when you were conceiving it. And I think you don't have to know what you're making at the time for it to be a piece of art.
Conrad's exploration of music and form reached a new audience in a recent public commission.
Dulwich Park came about through this sort of tragic theft of this sculpture by Barbara Hepworth, and it was stolen by scrap metal merchants about 5 years ago. So there was this public competition to create another art piece in the park, and I was lucky enough to win it. They're called 3 perpetual chords, but essentially there's no decay to them, so they keep going ad infinitum. They've got this sense of never ending. One of the things I'm most interested by in Hepworth's work is this idea of entering into the sculpture and creating this immersion. When I saw photographs of the Hepworth, there were lots with kids with their heads through the hole, and even though this was quite a formal sculpture, kids would run around it and use it as an object of play. And I really wanted to sort of engage with that as an idea, particularly because it was in a park. It's been incredibly well received by people under the age of 7. So it's become like a total climbing frame sensation. If you get kids running towards something, you know you're doing something right.
Conrad's works range from the playful to the highly conceptual. In his ongoing Ada project, named after the Victorian mathematician Ada Lovelace, who worked closely with Charles Babbage, he uses a robot to create a new relationship between music and mathematics.
I came up with this idea of creating a series of musical commissions that were basically getting musicians to respond to the robot. So they would, instead of the robot responding to the music would be subservient to the robot. Each musician would have to respond to this pre-existing piece of choreography, which is basically the movement of the wand and the light bulb, based on number crunching and sort of particular ratios we were taking off from Ada's work with Babbage.
Lovelace saw that a number could represent a note of music, a number could represent a letter of the alphabet. And if you like, that's what Conrad's doing. Conrad is seeing that number has meaning and significance that goes beyond its quantity.
Embracing everything from musical theory to quantum mechanics, Conrad's artistic output is becoming ever more ambitious. But his latest project will be his most epic so far.
Ideas. Ideas.
Over the past decade, British sculptor Conrad Shawcross has rapidly attracted international renown, with work shown everywhere from Tokyo to Tasmania, Mexico to Paris. Here in London's Royal Academy courtyard, he's installing his most ambitious sculpture to date, the dappled light of the sun.
The dappled light of the sun is definitely one of the most epic things we've made. It's actually been something that I conceived maybe nearly 10 years ago, so it's been a long time coming and a long time to arrive. There's 8,000 tetrahedrons in it. There's 12 man-years of welding, 25 tons of metal. It's a massive, massive race to get it done.
The biggest challenge was the logistical challenge. Our factory is 24,000 square feet. When these things were assembled in the factory, they then spilled out into the yard. So we ended up with thousands and thousands of these things marching across the workshop. The triangles are laser profiled in a nested fashion, like Russian dolls, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. 30,000 different triangles welded together into 8,000 tetrahedrons. That was 20 miles of welding, which took 10 men 4 months to produce.
Okay, can I have a bolt, please? What's this? The tetrahedron in Greek times was used as the symbol of the atom. It was the idea of the indivisible unit of matter. One of the contradictions of this thing on its own is such a sort of symbol of order and rationale. It seems so stable, but together they are completely chaotic and scary. Yeah, it's like too many children.
Can everyone just have a look up above to see if anything's loose or anything's been left loose on the tripods? We are on the 4th day of installing, and we are now about to raise the last cloud. We've got 4 in the air. We're just sort of shuffling them about to find the right positions. Still need to come in a bit. Twist it around a bit, maybe this way. Keep going around this way. We did all the safety checking, so we have to hang on each one. We have to put 150 kilos weight on each one, which essentially is get 2 guys to hang on it and see if there's any movement or any welds that seem to be compromised. It's been a good process because we found like 4 or 5 welds that weren't as good as they should be. That's really important, that one hangs straight. You can't put it in. Tightening all these spanners, you just catch your fingers, so my hands are totally ripped up, but this is part of the course. I really love doing this bit of it, it's really good fun.
After 4 days and nights of intensive work, dappled light of the sun is complete.
When I first used the tetrahedron, I was completely flummoxed by the way they go together because it forms these tendrils and these kind of branches and it never comes back on itself. So once it starts to grow out, it just forms these plant-like forms. So it feels like a plant in that the ones in the center are older and the ones on the edge are these sort of radicals that are younger. So there's this sense of time within the structure. You can see them as trees or fire or neural pathways, all these sort of radiant ideas of how you could grow. But essentially it acts as a canopy above the courtyard. It's on these very slender stilts. And you walk underneath it and it creates this dappled light on the ground, and the title just refers to the effect it has on the ground, and I guess that universal experience that we've all had of sitting under a tree in the summer and feeling like this is a wonderful moment. The shadows become more important with the work, and it used to be a byproduct, but I've been trying to sort of investigate it as the actual artwork itself. So there's pieces like slow arc inside a cube that the shadow is actually the end product of the piece. That refers back to a quotation that I chanced upon in the Science Museum from Dorothy Hodgkin, who was a scientist working in the last century. And she pioneered a process called crystal radiography, which is shining light through crystals, and you then look at the silhouettes of those crystals to try and understand their form. She described the process as like trying to work out the structure of a tree by only seeing its shadow. We live in this sort of shadows, and we'll never be able to see the real tree. I think it's a really sort of nice, very humble kind of metaphor that sort of acknowledges the limits of our potential, or how much we'll ever be able to know.
I was really fascinated with it when he showed me the original drawings, and to see this thing develop as an organic project, and now to see that sunlight shading onto the courtyard, that was quite remarkable. To really see what Conrad wanted to achieve with this structure in this morning was fantastic.
I think it's absolutely beautiful, and I think it's amazing when someone gets so much, I think they have so much conviction in the vision that it becomes form, isn't it? And then you get to see its full radiance in real life.
It really takes you when you come in, and then you think, you know, it's growing. It's all these triangles growing and growing, and is it a snake, or will it become a dragon, and there were all the shades on the ground. That was all really playing between the sun, shade, light, sky. That was interesting too.
Two elderly ladies came in not so long ago, and all this mess was on the floor before we actually elevated it, and they looked absolutely horrified and said, "What on earth is this? What on earth is going on? What's the Academy doing? Is this a tank trap or something?" And they thought it was the Royal Academy's terrorist policy. And then when they came back later, and a lot of them had been elevated on this support structure, so they became like ancient trees. They then thought, oh, marvellous, you know, they kind of understood what it was. But I love the fact that only he could generate that kind of reaction.
I think the work at the Royal Academy is a real masterwork, and I knew it was going to be a great work. When I actually saw it, then I was astounded by not only how monumental it is, but how lyrical it is as well. And it has a kind of lightness to it, which is very difficult to achieve in sculpture.
Conrad Shawcross's breathtaking creative curiosity shows no sign of waning. A fusion of physics, metaphysics, language, and metaphor, his work chisels away at the certainty of knowledge and our assumptions about the world around us.
Conrad is just using the materials of our age at his disposal to create sort of fantastic questions. They're always questioning. There's never an answer with his work, it's always a question.
There have been these wonderful eureka moments. They were really like a sort of scientist stumbling across something for the first time, and that moment of realization was very sort of exciting.
I don't quite know how Conrad does it. I've never known an artist who's managed such enormous projects, public commissions, that are all conflating at the same time. And I think it's a very exciting time to see his suddenly sort of extraordinary rise.
Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.